Hello, welcome to the sixth annual Global Demand Awards. Today, I am joined by Steve Chung, Chief Global Officer of CJENM, CEO of CJENM America, who is responsible for a number of popular titles that we will get in throughout this conversation. Steve, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brandon. Pleasure to be here.
So just to jump right in, you have a very eclectic background. I want to know, what was the catalyst for transitioning from government and East Asian studies in Harvard's undergrad Kirkland House while writing about CIA recruitment strategies for the Harvard Crimson to getting involved in the entertainment industry? Because at first glance, I don't know if I see the obvious connection.
Yeah, everything is sort of perfectly clear in hindsight, but I have to say my North Star that sort of ties the beginning and kind of the today that you highlighted was actually kind of my North Star has been really my hyphenated identity as a Korean American, and really having the feeling even 20 some years ago when I was graduating from college that in my generation, in my lifetime, that sort of U.S. Asia relations were going to be the defining relationship on a geopolitical sort of fundamental society political perspective. So I wanted to devote myself to some aspect to contribute to that understanding. So whether it's the government or international relations, to what I'm doing now, as you described, in charge of CJENM's international business outside of Korea, it really is, I'm at that cusp of really having U.S. Asia from a cultural and content perspective, being at that intersection on behalf of CJ, which is a really privileged position. So that's the big lens through which I viewed all of my career pursuits. And I'm so lucky to be in the seat I am now to be able to do that on a day-to-day basis.
I think that focus on that bridge between peoples is reflective in your track record. I mean, you started off as an analyst with Goldman Sachs before becoming executive producer of 21 at 21 for Shanghai Media Group's Dragon TV. The show host, Jack Pan, he told the New York Times back in 2005 that he wanted the series to be China's version of Larry King. I'm curious, what did you learn about broad audience taste from that experience? Because that seems to speak a little bit to what you're saying in that you are trying to connect people from a lot of different angles.
Yeah, I mostly learned what not to do since the show was on the air for 7 months. But boy, 2020, it was 2003 when I was in Beijing. Remember, 20 years ago in China. That was really an exciting time actually to be in China, as kind of the sleeping giant was waking up, if you will, and the people, the incredible people in China with a lot of energy. So it was a fascinating time to be. But yeah, that show, we literally started with nothing, and getting a primetime, high profile foreign guests who are politicians, actors, entertainers, business people on the air in China was no small feat. And I probably was able to do that with my partners because I didn't know any better. And if I, if I knew all of the troubles I would go through, I may not have even started it. But what an incredible opportunity for me to really learn everything from nothing. I really, as you point out, was a Goldman Sachs analyst out of college, 2 years. What do I know about media? What do I know about China? I'm Korean American, didn't speak a word of Chinese when I went. So I had to learn essentially everything, and did a lot of stuff directly, as a in pre-production, on production, on the set during the interviews, post-production in the edit rooms, to negotiating the distribution. So even though it was a very nascent market with a lot of uncertainty, I learned a ton, and that was really my first formative media experience. That really aspects of that I still carry with me today.
It sounds like one heck of an educational boot camp that was, sink or swim type of situation.
Yes, mostly sync.
So now you are with CJENM, and you've previously said that the themes that Korean content explores have to be universal, and that while you always want to make sure Korean content is authentic, original, native, and popular in its home market, you're also emphasizing programming that travels well to all markets. So beyond just relatable themes, what are the most important elements needed to create programming that resonates with a diverse array of cultures?
Yeah, there's so many more people at CJ more talented and qualified to speak on this point than I. But I would have to say that I agree with many of my colleagues when you approach stories from a macro or general perspective. That's like the quickest path to not being resonant. and
Right.
uh and so I think a lot of our stories that we tell really start at with the characters and the story at heart. And ironically, the more personal you get, the more universal actually the stories become. So I think a lot of our creators, whether it's on the Korean drama side with our writers, who are really the key creatives on our TV series, really have at the heart the characters and the stories and their personal kind of aspects to that, because we are all human, whether you live in Riyadh or Bangkok or Tokyo or Hollywood or Ohio, Dayton, whatever, wherever you may be, that we as human beings on this shared planet of ours have very similar things and experiences that we go through, just in different contexts. So I think we don't let this sort of macro global market in general shape and intrude on the compelling stories at the personal level. But on the other hand, as well, there may be some themes or contexts that may not be as relevant, or maybe very specific to a certain country that we know going in may not really have that appeal. So we try to filter those out, because we obviously always have more stories than we're able to tell. So when we're in the selection process of that, we do keep in mind that we are now programming to the world rather than just to Korea. So while it doesn't impact the crux of the stories, the kinds of projects we do pick up, we do have that extra filter of, will this play in Japan? Will this play in Southeast Asia? What would the North American audience feel? And the benefit of it, though, is because now that we do have a global marketplace and audience, the budgets have become, for better or for worse, higher and bigger. Some of that is inflation, but it does allow for great production value and for the storytellers to really allow their visions to manifest on a global level. So those are the benefits of having that sort of global orientation and a global audience.
It really feels, honestly, as if the film depicted in the wonderful poster behind you, Past Lives, is a great
Yes.
example of that. Because who among us has not experienced heartbreak? Who among us hasn't wanted to feel seen? Who among us hasn't contemplated the road not traveled? And that movie is a beautiful humanistic story that it doesn't matter what culture or background you come from, you can see a little bit of yourself and your journey most likely in that.
I absolutely love the film. Celine Song and the whole team just an amazing job. We're so proud to be involved in that, and certainly our partners A24. So it's exactly right. And in some ways, the past life story as a Korean American, it had a whole nother level of resonance to sort of my own experiences. But to your point, it happens to be they happen to be of Korean ethnicity and origin, but that story, you can replace that with any other country or
Right.
culture, and it's really a reflection of the times that we live today, and it's told so beautifully. So it's a great example of the kind of stories that we want to tell, and the global market and the resonance that those personal stories can attract.
One small mark of success is I'm sure Past Lives made everybody cry. Didn't matter what your background was. Everybody was weeping by the end, right along with Greta.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I love that scene at the end. So yeah, one of my favorites for sure.
Other CJENM series, Boys Planet, The Glory, Crash Landing on You, and 2521, they are all among the 20 most in-demand Korean series worldwide since 2020, according to Parrot Analytics. And CJ Entertainment Films' Parasite and Decision to Leave are the two most in-demand Korean movies in that time. In a business ruled by bias, how have you and your team managed to deliver resonant programming so consistently?
Well, I think it was almost like a perfect moment, and we really love our partners, Netflix, as well as we work with all the major streamers, Amazon, Disney, and more, Paramount Plus, etc. And I think you talked about kind of a little bit of the bias, or some of the hurdles that a non-English genre and content had to face as it sort of traveled the world. And I think talking about that perfect combination, a global streaming platform, as the word suggests, the direct to consumer platform, really cuts out a lot of the personal biases or preconceptions of what somebody might think an audience might resonate with or not. Really, with some of the power of very sort of unbiased, if you will, machines with personalization engines that really reduce the friction between the content and the consumption from the audience perspective, and allowing the audiences to discover what is truly good and not, and for good things to rise up to the top. It's a truly, in that way, a democratic platform. Whereas, if you compare that to maybe how things are traditionally done, and clearly we still have humans involved in every aspect of the curation and the creation of this, but once a show goes on a platform, once the audiences find things that they like, there's really no stopping that. And the numbers really tell. And so you have this great combination of Korean content over the past 3-4 decades. Every year, stories get better, and the acting and the talent get better, and it just constant improvement, really, with the domestic audiences who really demand a lot from their entertainment companies of stories that are good. So you have that domestic pressure and expectation met with the creative community who've really risen to meet that challenge. Then you put on top of that a global platform with a platform like Netflix, who are going to spend the time, because it's their business model, to subtitle and dub all of these sort of non-English content for easy access to the world. And you don't have anybody saying, why are you doing that? Who would ever watch a show based on an old Korean kids game that have some violent aspects, but talk about class struggle? Like, try to sell that log line to somebody, and saying that that's going to be a resonant story, and nobody would have probably guessed that that would be ultimately Netflix's most popular TV series ever. So I think it's just like a perfect storm of Korean content being ready and prepared, and already enjoying quite a bit of success in places like Southeast Asia and Japan. It's already been traveling outside of the borders of Korea for the past decade plus. And then now you've got this oil thrown onto the flame of this global instant simultaneous distribution that cut out the middle curator, if you will. And voila, you've got, as Netflix's data itself showed, not just Parrot, out of the top 100 shows in the first half of last year, I think Korean content made up something like 15 plus of that. And CJ had around half of those hits to our credit. So we love this leveling of the playing field, where people don't stand in the way between what's good and what audiences crave. So we love where we are now.
Even while discoverability and recommendation algorithms remain far from perfect, particularly in large streaming libraries, the benefit, as you mentioned, of these global streamers is that we are never at a loss for quality programming if we're willing as consumers to maybe shuffle through a few pages, find those titles, because there are so many great quality stories just waiting to be unearthed. But to that point, I'm curious, from your perspective, how would you describe the mental math that goes on at the studio level when deciding whether or not to finance a film or TV show? Because now that traditional box office and linear ratings are no longer the complete picture of success, I wonder, what are the factors that contribute to a yes or a no?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, we have multiple studios within CJ, right? So from the TV series perspective, our flagship studio is called Studio Dragon, where this studio is primarily responsible for most of the big TV series hits that you see on Netflix. We have a new studio called CJ E&M Studios, where we gathered 8 of the most top 10 prolific movie directors of all time in Korea, and sort of combined them into one studio and gave them the remit of creating high quality TV series. We have a studio in Thailand that's a joint venture there. You know, we have a new studio that we just spun up in Japan. We acquired Endeavor Content, now renamed Fifth Season, the makers of Severance, Tokyo Vice, Nine Perfect Strangers, etc. So at every, and we, of course, we have a film division that responsible for films like Parasite, etc., past lives. So every studio is going to have a slightly different view to what gets greenlit or not. But at the end of the day, it's really it comes down to the story themselves. You know, do we think this is telling a story that would resonate with the audience? Korea, but also on a global basis, and does it match with what we feel the sort of world is missing or can benefit from? Which are sort of good filters through which you can hopefully predict some commercial success as well. So CJ's got a range of, I mean, we as a media company do almost everything a media company can do, from having linear channels to an OTT platform called TVing in Korea, to having television production, film, unscripted. We even do music where we grow K-pop artists and talent, music channels. We have a sister company that's in theatrical, the fifth largest theater chain in the world, called CGV. We do musicals. I mean, literally anything you can think of in entertainment, we do. So, we've got a lot of lenses through which we, greenlit projects. And so we have an amazing group of leaders throughout the world, especially in Korea. And we're really proud to say that CJ E&M may not be the biggest media company in the world, but hopefully one of the most consequential is where we like to put ourselves.
And I'm glad in that answer that you mentioned Fifth Season. It was previously known as Endeavor Content, and you completed the acquisition in January 2022. Their primary business is premium scripted series. And as you mentioned, probably most famous for Apple TV Plus's Severance, Tokyo Vice on Max. The second season's coming up in February. I'm personally very excited.
Yes.
What sort of management and distribution advantages does this provide to you guys as you look to grow the non-Korean content side of the business?
Yeah, and by the way, I think premium scripted television is what Fifth Season really has been most mature on, but we do have a fantastic film and docs business as well. But to answer your question, they add a great deal. I mean, what a phenomenal team of executives and leaders we have at Fifth Season to be able to have those kinds of cultural impact with shows that you just mentioned. So from clearly Fifth Season as a preeminent and emerging studio have all of the key distribution relationships with the streamers and all of the networks, certainly in North America and global. And we actually have our own distribution team that's actually headquartered in London, headed by a lady named Prentice Fraser, who is responsible for the global distribution of Fifth Season's content, as well as second and third party content that we source. So there are a lot of touch points between CJ's existing business, where we have traditionally been strongest in probably Asia Pacific, namely Japan and Southeast Asia, and Fifth Season was traditionally very strong in North America, Europe, and also Australia, UK, so the Commonwealth territories. So the power of bringing these sort of two things together is magical, and we certainly want to do more and more. And every day that goes by, we're increasing these touch points between Fifth Season and CJ's existing business. But we have regular conversations, everything from management and strategy down to the creatives and projects that take either Fifth Season's IP or CJ's IP and do adaptations cross-culturally. We're really honored to actually have invited Toho, Japan's #1 entertainment company, who just put in $225 million into Fifth Season and is now the second largest shareholder after CJ.
You're getting ahead of me, because honestly, that was my next question. So I
Yeah.
appreciate an informed guest.
Yes. So So that, now look at this. We've brought like the Avengers of media companies on a global basis. We've got, Fifth Season, who I would consider to be the next big, media company of the future, molded in this generation. Well, combined with CJ, the most consequential non-English content media company, in my opinion. And now we've got Toho, a company with such history, and IP like Godzilla, for example, that's going to add so much more texture to all of our capabilities around the world. We are so excited about that.
So sticking with that around the world idea, your company has a distribution pact with Netflix, which committed $2.5 billion in additional content spend in South Korea last year, and emerging partnerships with Disney Plus, Amazon, Paramount Global, as you mentioned, and others. How do you develop and tailor distinct strategies with these various distribution arms to harness Korean content and make it a central element of their global acquisition strategies? Because CJ, seemingly from the outside looking in, is bringing a lot of added value to the table to these massive partners.
Well, we love to think that, and thank you for characterizing us that way. Yeah, we have very good relationships, as I mentioned, with all of the partners you mentioned. And it's really about what we can provide, but also what they need. And we certainly are in a role to be able to help inform and educate and to kind of discuss together. And the good news is it doesn't take too much convincing these days because the data is so stark and incontrovertible that there is a great global fandom of Korean content around the world. And so if you are a streamer interested in both acquisition and retention of users, and Korean drama, as you know, can be some of the most addictive programming, and it's sort of
I
designed.
do know. I
Oh,
am a
wait.
proud couch potato. I consume it all. And you know what? If my boss ever gets mad at me for lack of productivity, you're to blame.
Exactly. Send them my way. But look, as the world also moves from not only acquisition of subscribers and retention, but also advertising. And one of the key inputs to advertising is how long you spend the time to watch something. So these distinct sort of storylines and plots of Korean dramas that lend themselves to binge watching and spending long hours on that show is highly conducive to great monetization on the advertising side now as well. So, long story short, every streamer is going to have their sort of lens through which they view the world and their specific needs at a given moment. But we are happy to be proactively and deeply engaged in conversations with all of the major networks. And I feel like we're just getting started. Netflix and CJ had a head start 5 years ago. You mentioned kind of our relationship, and Netflix is also a shareholder in Studio Dragon.
Yeah.
And so there's a long history and partnership there with Netflix, and we will continue to grow and do even more with them, hopefully. But at the same time, as you mentioned, there are lots of other partners who really want to also get their credibility shined on the Korean drama and fandom side. So happy to work with them to do what we can to partner on that front. So there's just so much opportunity, and we just Korean drama, but also K-pop, which is also seeing a resurgence of fandom and resonance all over the world. The last time I was in Riyadh, I would have never expected to see throngs of screaming fans speaking fluent Korean who are Saudi. Where am I?
The world is getting smaller in a good
It
way.
is getting smaller, and I think the younger generation, especially, which is what I love about our business, really, it's a generation that have grown up in YouTube and Instagram and in TikTok and Twitter, and this idea of countries and landlocked, kind of political divisions and borders don't really exist in that way from a content consumption, certainly. So, whether you live in the Middle East or Europe or North America or Asia, it's really a global world of content consumption. So, and with the language part and access being taken care of by dubbing and subtitling, really, we are in a smaller world. And I think Korean content is very well positioned for a world like that.
So to bounce quickly off of what you're saying about younger generations and how they're, interacting with media, CJ is the annual festival sponsor for KCON, the yearly K culture event, which routinely draws crowds of around 100,000 people. I'm curious, what role do you think in-person events play in the entertainment industry in a post-pandemic, fully digital world in which Gen Z and Gen Alpha are much more likely to pick up a screen than anything else?
Yes, I think those both things can be true, which is a world that's heavily connected by digital, but also a world simultaneously where experiences matter. And I think we see both of those dualities come through in this younger generation. But to your point, I think it plays a very important role in having this sort of in real life forum to really be able to gather the fandom. And the KCON now, where it's in 12th year, originally started in LA. Now we do it 4 times a year. LA still being the biggest, had 140,000 people come last year. But we do one in Bangkok, we do one in Tokyo, we did one in Saudi Riyadh. So it's become like 12 years ago. People like, are there really fans of K-pop? Really? Are you sure? And so, like let's throw an event and you see for yourself what kind of fandom it is. And now 140,000 people later, okay. And the interesting thing is the last one, the demographic split, by the way, is something along the lines of like 33% Caucasian, 32% Hispanic, 29% Asian, and the minority of the Asian being Korean descent. So K of KCON,
Yeah.
it's really almost just a descriptor of the genre. It no longer refers to you must be Korean to enjoy, or it's just not Korean people singing. We have K-pop groups who are Japanese people speaking Japanese, singing Japanese songs, who are a K-pop band as well. So anyway, I think in real life is hugely important. I think it's a differentiator for CJ. And I think, every media company has their in real life outlet or wants to have it. And I think you're going to see that, clearly Disney with their parks business is kind of the ultimate description of a in real life meeting forum for Disney fans. And other media companies have sort of their versions of it. CJ's got that KCON event. We're actually in the process of developing more in real life fandom events for Korean drama and K-pop as well. And so I
Can
think
you sneak me a ticket? Can I abuse my position here as an interviewer and just get in there?
absolutely, you're
So,
invited, Brandon.
thank
You
you.
got it. You got it.
So you've touched on it throughout this interview, and that is that South Korean culture, from music, film, TV, games, literature, has gained this global prominence. I want to know: are there other areas you feel that need to also begin transcending borders to bolster the region's cultural footprint on the worldwide stage, or do you think it's most important to focus on those central facets that have already crossed over, that already have established fandoms that are growing worldwide?
Yeah, I do think that Korean content in general have already fanned out and have those landing points. And so I feel like there isn't sort of some big area that's not quite there yet. I do, however, feel like from a consumer perspective, that content resonance is there. I think the business elements to support those interests are still lacking. And it's so what I mean by that. Well, K-pop is huge, and everywhere you go, you see BTS or Blackpink or the next group, and everybody's talking about it. But if you look at, okay, so what are the business what's a business infrastructure and who's really driving the business of K-pop, where you're going to see a big cliff, in my view, of kind of the business infrastructure and the operations not supporting that fandom sufficiently. So I feel like Korean content as a general is widely distributed. Now, as business people, we need to fill in to make sure that these content categories are sustainably supported commercially, and that there are touch points that just don't stop by having, oh, geez, isn't it so fun and nice that a K-pop group charted as a top, whatever, 10 on the Billboard charts, not stopping there, but actually then using that to build out the business
Right.
and the infrastructure to support that kind of thing so that it can be a systematically repeatable sort of thing. So it's not just a flash in the pan. So that's what I spend a lot of my time thinking about, is that we've got this amazing creative resonance and zeitgeist around the world. How do we, as CJ and with great partners we have, institutionalize this progress through these relationships that are here to stay rather than being just one fad that passes us by?
It's nice to get a little bit of the glimpse into the future and how that's going to be built out and how those ecosystems are going to be formed. But to bring it back to the scripted content, it's rare for even successful Korean series to run more than one season, which has been the case for Crash Landing on You and The Glory. As someone who does not mind binging several seasons, I wonder, is that something you feel may need to change moving forward? And if so, what's the best way to go about that in an ecosystem in which attention spans are shortening?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the allures of Korean drama so far is that the writers really don't hold anything back. You know, it's
True.
like there is a saying in Korean. It basically amounts to watching a Korean drama is eating a lot of starchy sweet potato in the beginning, and then at the end gulping down like 7 Up or a carbonated drink because it sort of clears the system. So
Right.
that's kind of the pattern of watching Korean dramas. Like there's a buildup, there's a buildup, there's a buildup, and then once you get to like episode 8 or 9, it is just like one after another nonstop. And like by the end, you like blew your wad, right? Like there's nothing more to give on this story. So that's what sort of is a very satisfying experience of a typical Korean drama. And it's only been 8 or 9 episodes of late. It used to be 20, 30, episodes of sort of date, 2 or 3 episodes a week type of thing for 3, 4 months. So but from a business perspective as well, and the continuity and character building, and so many interesting characters that you sometimes or many times wish there was a season 2 and a season 3. And so there is, I would say, an effort by CJ and other Korean creators to have more of a serialized storytelling experience, but still not sacrificing this very satisfying nature of watching Korean dramas that you don't really hold anything back. And I think that's actually a good and a bad thing, because even our best creators or best writers often feel like I'm done with this story now. Like, let me move on to the next
Right.
one. Whereas in the U.S. in Hollywood, almost the very definition of success is that you get to a season 4, season 5, right? And so you have this disparate mentality of U.S. writers wanting to have multiple seasons because it's sort of lucrative and it gives you a lot of canvas to work with. Whereas traditionally Korean writers are like, I'm done with the story. I'd rather go on to the next one. So, but what doing that keeps the story so fresh and so timely and so resonant with the times. So hopefully we can still retain those things that make Korean dramas what they were, but still offer the more serialized experience to really satisfy the fandom and grow it. And certainly from a business perspective, as seasons get mature, you can build out franchises and IP that then can be leveraged to do other businesses, which is good for the industry.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I get it. But if you ever do, you got a guaranteed viewer right here for sure.
Thank you, Brandon.
Now, last question, and I'll get you out of here. If you could have dinner with one fictional character, who would it be and why?
Yeah, I I saw that. You know who I would, and I this is coming from my I have a 5-year-old and 3-year-old daughters. And we just had a joint birthday party for them, and the theme was Mickey. And you know what? I would love to have lunch with Mickey Mouse.
It's a great
And
answer.
just past the kind of the 100-year mark, and now it's in public domain. And the evolution, and I think it was Walt Disney's quote, something like remember it all started with just a mouse, and the incredible evolution of Mickey Mouse and how you're able to take that character and theme and evolve it with the times. And my daughter was the one who pointed out, Dad, how come this Mickey Mouse has the yellow shoes and that Mickey Mouse has yellow gloves? I had never really even realized that, and so it's just the power of IP and the storytelling and the richness of history. I would love to hear, Mickey, looking back on the 100 years of history that you've been through, what kinds of lessons learned did you have? And that would be a really fun lunch.
In almost a decade of asking that question, no one has ever said Mickey Mouse. So very original, very good answer. Steve Chung, thank you so much for being here and for your time. We really appreciate it. And we're so excited to see everything that CJ has to offer in 2024 and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. Pleasure to be here.